So let's move on to the last function, which is recover. How do you recover from an incident, having responded to it well? And the other.
All right. So I want to start by talking about recover and giving you an analogy that hopefully most of you can understand. How many of you have ever lost power due to a hurricane or snow or anything? Raise your hand if you have. People have lost service. You've lost it. They're prioritizing what to fix first, right? They also work with other agencies. They work with police departments and fire departments, and they're also communicating, right? They typically have a website. Hey, this is the map of our outages. They're sending emails. Hey, by the way, we realize your power's out. We believe that we will have power up in a certain amount of time. They're communicating with the media, right? So they really seem to have this down, or hopefully in most of the cases, in most of the incidents they're responding to, they have it down. And they have it down because they practice. And they do this a lot. And this is you. This is you in your organization as you are trying to respond in maybe for your group of buildings, for your campus of buildings, or your own building, right? And so I want to make this a real world example. So at first I thought about ransomware, because ransomware is really starting to attack our industry a lot, right? Where malware comes in either through a USB drive on a rogue attachment and encrypts systems on the network. But I decided, no, I'll come up with a different one. And then I thought about the customer whose supervisor was just stolen, right? Somebody walked in and there was no physical. And then yesterday I heard of another really interesting one. Apparently there was a disgruntled employee at a sewage treatment plant, and he realized that electronically, he's still using a password, he could log. It is based on an attack that's happened over the last month, and they believe it might be targeted towards the oil and gas sector. Quote I have about this is, the attack, which consisted of 2 types of malware, disrupted the entire corporate IT network and disrupted physical access control systems and loss of critical process control monitoring systems. So this was an attack that really affected their IT network and then had ramifications on the OT network as well. So here's our scenario that we're going to walk through. You get an alert. Let's say you're a facility manager of a group of buildings, and your buildings are not operating correctly. They've gone haywire somehow. Your temperature controls are unresponsive. People are complaining, it's hot in here. Why is it so hot in here? The security badging systems have stopped working. The cooling systems that were specialized for cooling a data center in one of your buildings that manages 24/7 cloud operations, it shut down, and so the servers crashed, right? The elevators aren't working. People are trapped in the elevators, right? So during the response phase, you realize that malware has affected everything, your IT and your OT networks. This is how that recent attack happened, by the way. Malware infected the corporate Active Directory infrastructure, so and they weaponized it so that anyone logging in would get the login script. And the tricky part about this malware was it didn't do anything initially. All it did was replicate itself for a really long time. And so they're still trying to investigate how long it was actually on the network, right? In our scenario here, some secondary malware attacks connected building automation systems, and And your communications infrastructure is also affected too. You know, one of the things that this recent real attack did was it attacked communications infrastructure, email servers, voice over IP systems. So when the attack was underway, the organization wasn't able to communicate effectively, right? So what do you do? So as a facility manager, you're getting calls, your phone's ringing off the hook, you're getting texts. People are mad, like it's hot in here. People are like, I can't get into my building. Hey, there's some people trapped on the elevator. What do we do? And the media's here, and they just want a couple quotes from you. How do you respond? As we said before, the way you respond has incredible ramifications legally and reputation-wise, and possibly financially. So what's involved? Recovery planning. You need to have a plan, and you need to think through various scenarios. You have to think about who's involved. Who needs to be involved in all aspects of the plan? Who's actually going to be recovering? Who's going to work on that recovery process? You need a plan because people typically don't make good on-the-spot decisions, right? Especially under stressful conditions. How are you going to communicate, right? One, do you know if your infrastructure is affected? Is your email system actually affected by the attack? Are your phones affected by the attack? You know, how will you communicate? Who do you need to get involved for crafting that message? One, to your customers. Two, sometimes to your shareholders. And three, to the media, right? Is there anything that you can pre-plan now, communication-wise, so that when you are under a stressful condition, that maybe for the situation? And then finally, the recover portion is all about improvements affected. Which things should you hit first? Do you have contractual obligations, right? You have to think through this in advance for when you have to recover all your systems. Are there interim approaches that you can use? Is the threat actually still over, right? So in the attack that I was talking about, where Active Directory was affected, before they realized that Active Directory was affected, they were wiping systems, they were bringing them back on, but then the next time they logged in, they got infected again, right? Or, even worse, if the malware has been on your system for a really long time, you recover from backup, the backup is actually compromised, right? Do you have multiple backups? Do you have dated backups? And what are the ramifications of recovering from an old backup? What kind of data will you lose? Have you planned for recovering from hardware failure, right? A lot of people haven't. A lot of people think about backups of software, but they don't think about, wow, the hardware's damaged now. What do I have? Hardware that I could swap in, right? And then finally, who should be involved in the whole process? OT, IT, lawyers, marketing communications, executives. And as I said, communication is really a complex thing. Typically, most organizations do have to work with PR people, marketing communications. And my marketing communications leader is right in the room. And I work with her closely on a lot of things regarding cybersecurity, our messaging with cybersecurity. And certainly, if we ever had to respond and recover from an event, Therese, who's sitting right there, is someone that I would decide, right? This is really, really important. You need to come with what your message is, how your organization will communicate, and who will do the communication, because that has really, really important implications. So anyway, my last slide. So how do you do it? How do you prepare, test, and execute your plan? So the Cybersecurity Infrastructure and Security Agency, CISA, their U.S. CERT Cyber Resilience Review, I have a link on the slide to that. And it's a great thing for any organization to go through. Like, how resilient are we? How resilient can we be to recover from a cyber attack, right? And there's lots of references, and then there's even kind of a crosswalk between that and the NIST cybersecurity framework, which I've listed here. I won't go into all of it. But there's so many references out there. NIST has some great references. Is the person who was asking about the small business and how do I get started and how can I have these processes and set them in place? Well, NIST has a lot of great documents to get you started, right? But it has to be customized for your organization and what you do. I would say the most prepared organizations do something called tabletop exercises, where when they do have a recovery plan or a response and recovery plan, they go through this and they all stand around the table and say, okay, here's the scenario. What do we do first? And then all the stakeholders, talk through the plan. And usually that's the case where people realize, oh wow, I have gaps in my plan. I didn't account for this in the scenario. And that's when they can revise them, right? Even more prepared organizations, as I talked about before, do red team, blue team exercises. This takes a little bit more prep and a lot more resources, right? Because you do have attackers, and then you do have responders. And what you're doing is you're really testing the resilience of your plan. You're identifying your gaps, and then you're closing them. And so it really just depends on your appetite for risk and your approach to risk management. But what's really the recover process is it really does point to the necessity of all the 5 functions of the NIST CSF, right? And the great part about recovery is now that we've gone through this recovery process, how can we improve it, right? And like I said, the power company, they've gotten pretty good at this because they have to do it so often. And I think we have to get in the habit of practicing. So that's all I have.
Wondering about all of that is you use the word you a lot. Right?
Yes.
You have to have a plan, you have to do this, you have to.
Yep.
Always thinking, who are you talking about? You, right? Because all the way back to the vendors. I kind of worry about that part of it.
Yeah, I think ultimately the building owner, as the owner, has to at least have someone managing that building, facility manager, and that building owner has to be aware that these things can happen, and really write that into the job description for the facility manager. And so, but you really does become complicated because, as I mentioned, this involves a lot of people in the organization. You have executives, you have legal, you have marketing communications, you have the tech staff.
But the concern is that if you, whoever the building owner, has not actually done that right, or has not done it at all, then going back to Jerry's point, right, some contractor is going to be, lose their reputation significantly. So it goes back to Jim Lee's point that this is a collaborative effort. That you can't have any holes in it.
Correct.
I was just going to add a point, like say your server gets hit. Well, as Kevin pointed out, you just don't want to reload the software quickly because it may be in the BIOS, it may be on that hardware.
Yeah,
you don't really see, and you don't have any tools to know. So we've had clients that they tell you that, oh yeah, well this happened to us, and we just reloaded on the server, and then they had it again, right?
Yeah.
And what I will say, the real customers that are on their toes, and this is important too, they will look and see, do we have spare controllers? Do we have a spare server? Maybe it's a virtualized server. But do we have the right, for a 2-hour recovery target, do we have the right resources and items in stock, and do we practice the plan? And you will laugh and say, that's not happening. Well, for some people with mission critical things, they can't go beyond, a couple hours. So it's not for everyone, but everyone needs to review it.
Robert?
Yeah, I was just going to say when we talk about the, when you said you, so who's the you, and also when it comes to the plan, one of the things is to always make sure that everyone knows the role that they're going to play. Because quite often you'll have a plan, and in that plan will be, I'm going to call this person. Maybe it's an integrator, a third-party company that you're working with. Just make sure that they understand that they're part of that process. Quite often, you make that phone call and 2 o'clock in the morning on a dark night, and they say, oh, I didn't know I was on the hook for this. I didn't know this was part of my plan. So they're very much that plan just really does spread, and just make sure you kind of round it out all the edges of it.
So if an integrator bidding for a job and the building owner does not have a plan, should you refuse to take that job? Should you demand? Is there like a reverse specification? You specify that there is a plan, otherwise you take the responsibility of.
Good luck telling contractors to turn work down.
That's my point. That's not going to happen.
No, but it's an educational conversation you can have with them.
Right.
I mean,
Even by raising it, you.
Right. Yeah. Just asking the question is often enough to trigger an activity.
Right. Again, going back to the benefit.
I think it's also possible to, as a contractor or as a supplier of product, to bring more to the table than just a question. Right? Lots of things get done first cut by having a model. Right? So here's a model policy. Lots of people use one just like this. You assume they're good with you, and then you follow the policy. You know it's a pretty decent policy.
Offering.
Give them a little more than just a question. Give them an answer.
Right.
That's at least generically reasonable for most situations.
Okay.
Yeah, and I've seen some companies say, hey, here's our approach for managing risk. Hey, do you have any policies for that? And chances are they would say, hey, I really like that. And my sense is that this is going to start being built into the contracts from now on. I mean, we're already seeing it just from a vendor and manufacturer perspective. People are asking all the details of our cybersecurity process, what our capabilities are. I think we're going to see that more from the owners to the facility managers and to those companies who are integrators as well. And that's good, because they should.
And I will say, I get a lot of questions from our branch offices or remote offices, and they'll say, well, they want us to write a disaster recovery plan. And I'm like, what? What does that mean? They should have their own processes. We can step in and help them talk about the BAS server, but we shouldn't be writing, that's not our forte, right? We shouldn't be writing the disaster recovery plan for a university. I mean, there's many pieces of it, right? So one, get a clarification and then have that conversation. Are you sure about that?
I think that's great. And I think that this leads very nicely to Andy talking about taking action.